Remember back in the day when this was Deadpool? Yeah, honestly, this was my favorite version only because somebody finally got Ryan Reynolds to shut his big mouth, which honestly, up to this point, I thought was nearly impossible. Blake Lively definitely deserves some sort of achievement or an award of some kind. I'm totally joking about Blake Lively deserving an award, not the whole Ryan Reynolds being annoying. But all jokes aside, I actually wanted to dive into this whole Deadpool 3 situation, or Deadpool Wolverine film that's supposed to be coming out in the next couple of months, because I definitely feel like there's a lot of weight on the shoulders of this particular project. Not to say that it's fair, because it definitely isn't. It's not Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds' problem that the MCU is in absolute shambles, but unfortunately they're arriving at a very, very bad time for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And just to give you guys a little bit of background information on the entire universe, the latest Ant-Man film, which by the way, I did not by any stretch of the imagination believe was really that bad of a film. It was a decent film. I didn't love the ending. Essentially, it boils down to Ant-Man and Kang duking it out fist to fist. It just didn't feel like they're building up Kang the way that I personally felt like it should have. The way that they built up Thanos, for example, he was somewhat of a background character, but there was always this kind of like elusiveness to him, and he seemed like an all-powerful being that really could not be matched. And Kang was supposed to be that character after Thanos, but I really don't feel it. It feels like everybody that's met a version of Kang has just been able to easily defeat him. And I know there's supposed to be like alternate versions of him, and there's supposed to be one that really threatens the Marvel universe, but I just didn't feel it personally. I felt like they should have killed off Paul Rudd's Ant-Man and then built up Kang even more to the point where he was going to actually start off taking legitimate Marvel characters off the books, but that's not what happened at all. But the first 80% of the film, I actually genuinely enjoyed it. It was a little bit cheesy, it was a little bit over the top, but that's why I love this film. There were some very memorable lines, very quotable sequences, and the characters really stuck with you. As I said, it's not the worst film of all time, but definitely not one of the better MCU offerings. But as I said, I was going to give you guys a brief little glimpse at how these movies did in the box office. This particular film only made about $470 million at the box office. By the way, just to give you guys the polar opposite, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Infinity War actually made over $2 billion, while Endgame made almost about 2.8 billion. And I know those are complete polar opposites. One of the films came out when the MCU was at its peak, and then the other one definitely when the MCU is kind of fizzling out in mainstream media. Captain America Civil War was another prime example of when people actually gravitated towards watching a lot of these MCU films. It was able to gross over $1 billion as well. And even those that had more of a cult following that didn't necessarily appeal to everybody, you had, for example, the Guardians of the Galaxy, the entire trilogy that has done extremely well. I believe the first one grossed about like 700 million, and then the latest one, number 3, was actually able to gross over 800. And if you're wondering how much the Marvels was able to make at the box office worldwide, it was only able to reach about 200 million. Now granted, according to a lot of different sources, this was actually a film that had a smaller budget than a lot of the other MCU projects, but 200 million is still a massive fail by Marvel standards. And a lot of these films that don't necessarily do too well at the box office can usually make it up on the back end with maybe like merchandising or extra product that can be themed according to the film. But even then, we saw a lot of the merchandising for this particular film go on sale or clearance. People just were not interested in this particular film. By the way, another one of those films that was heavily criticized, but just in my personal opinion, I thought it was a semi-decent film for like the first 70% of it. It was intriguing. They tried something a little bit different. I know, like I said, very similar to the Ant-Man and Wasp most recent film. It definitely had some over-the-top cheesiness, but like I said, it was trying something new, something innovative and fresh. And even though I know that not everybody was into this particular film, you can at least commend them or tip your hat for them at least trying. Now, I don't necessarily think that you can pinpoint one particular reason for why the MCU is in a downward spiral where I think it's a combination of multiple different issues. A lot of it has to do with maybe the writing, the fact that there's no cohesiveness here. The storytelling is a little bit bland. The characters are just not as likable. And the actors themselves, a lot of people just don't want to see in the MCU anymore. You have, for example, the whole Jonathan Majors situation. I'm not really going to get too deep into it. That seems like a topic for or a discussion for a completely different video because it's very extensive. But that's just one of the other issues that the MCU is having to deal with while simultaneously still having to run a business and make money. And so I think that just has really caused the fan base to really stop supporting Marvel as a whole in terms of the live action projects. Don't even get me started on any of the shows and animated stuff that they've been releasing. It's either very lukewarm or just an absolute waste of my time. But essentially, this is where the newest Deadpool is going to be slotted, right after this tumultuous situation with Jonathan Majors. The MCU film's just not raking in any money, and all of this pressure is going to fall onto the shoulders of Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman. And by the way, this project in and of itself doesn't necessarily sound foolproof. There's still a number of different issues. Are you going to really introduce them into the MCU, or are they going to be playing alternate versions of themselves? There's been some speculation that even like Hugh Jackman isn't necessarily playing like the Wolverine from the Fox universe. This is supposed to be like an alternate dimension or alternate version Wolverine. I just don't know how we're supposed to connect with Hugh Jackman on a deeper level if he's just playing another random character. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Alternate dimensions, alternate versions of reality. Yes, give me that in comic book form, but in live action, I need the stakes to be higher. I need there to be a more on the line. You can't tell me that there's a universe out there where Iron Man survives and they're able to defeat Thanos, or an alternate version where Scarlett Johansson is still playing Black Widow. I just don't need that. I think I need things to be a little bit more cemented in reality, and unfortunately the MCU seems to be going further and further away from that, and I just don't think that there's enough weight to it, especially with like Kang, there being alternate versions. Same thing, I just don't know if he's necessarily one villain or multiples. Everything is just so unclear. And like I said, even though I'm not the biggest fan of Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman, but I still feel like it's completely unfair that they're being pressured with this project. Not to mention Disney, Kevin Feige, and everybody involved decided to keep the entire Deadpool franchise, at least up to this point, a rated R affair, which is really risky. I mean, you're already asking quite a bit of them. You want the film to be critically successful as well as monetarily, but you're also restricting them by keeping that rated R classification, which could honestly backfire. We all know that for the most part, rated R films just have a much more difficult job at the box office as a whole. Now, obviously, for this entire franchise to survive, it definitely has to be critically well received, at least decent reviews overall from just normal watchers as well as critics. But you also have to take into consideration how much money this film should potentially make for the franchise to continue in the DC MCU. I think on average this film should at least break around like 800 to 900 million. Again, really not fair to them, but that's just what I think Disney is going to expect from this film. They really need to be able to recover from the last two failures that the MCU had to go through, which, you know, we already covered extensively, but I just feel like they could potentially be set up to fail. Now, as always, this is just my personal opinion. These are the readings that I'm getting from like the MCU landscape, but I could be completely wrong, and honestly I do hope that I am wrong, because I am a huge fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But I'm always very curious to see what you guys have to say as a community. Let me know your thoughts down below. Am I right? Am I wrong? Am I completely off the wagon here? Let me know down below. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you like these type of random ramblings from an absolute madman, then definitely stay tuned. We do this quite often from time to time. So thank you guys for tuning in. I'll see you guys in the next one.